Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Susan Williams, and representing the Freedom Socialist Party. And I have lived in New York for many years, although I'm originally from the West Coast, and I grew up in the state of Washington. So, again, hi, and thank you very much. I've met some of you either last night or Thursday night at UVU, and that's great. I've really enjoyed talking with people. For those of you who might like to be in touch and haven't signed my little mailing list here yet, I'd like to pass that around and do a little passing around here while I'm talking. And this is a copy of our newspaper, and I really don't want to be carrying them all the way back across the country again. So I'm going to just invite people to take a copy. We have a new issue that's gone to press and is going to be in the mail, so please feel free to help yourself to a copy of this and take a look at the literature that I have over here. And I also have some cards, which I forgot to pull out before, but I'm also a member of the Freedom Socialist Party sister organization, Radical Women. So feel free to grab any one of those, either one of those cards, and it can tell you how to get hold of me. So as I say, I was invited here to talk particularly about socialist feminism. Why socialist feminism? Why not just socialism? What does feminism have to do with it? And I really did want to focus on that, both in terms of why I think it's important as a theory, but also what it means in practice, what kind of work you can do as a socialist feminist, and I think needs to be done in this period. Because I believe, and I have the feeling that you guys all do too, that the question of what we're going to do with the society that we live in, how we're going to respond to the crisis that capitalism has created for itself and is taking out on our hides, that pressing question is becoming ever more urgent. And people need to have a solution. Without having in front of them a solution for the social ills that people can believe in and can believe that is possible to make happen, they're going to just keep flip-flopping back and forth between the Republicans, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Democrats, or Marx forbid, head off into the Tea Party when they get so totally disgusted and demoralized that they can't believe that real change is possible. We don't want to be seeing that happen. So one of the questions that people have asked me on this trip so far, and lots of other people too, for that matter, over the years, is why call yourself a socialist feminist or a Marxist feminist? Because the Freedom Socialist Party is bases itself on Marxist ideology and the method of Marx. Why not just say you're a Marxist? Shouldn't that include everything that has to do with the oppression of women and liberating women as a sex? My answer to that is, yeah, I believe that it does, that it can, that it should, but the vast majority of Marxists, for them it doesn't. The problem is not with the philosophy or with the methodology, but how it's been implemented. And the reality is that still today, even though big strides have been made, there is a real problem in understanding how central, how critical the issue of the oppression of women is within the left in general, and that really has to do with all aspects of the left. One of the RSU comments, one of the men told me last night, he related a story in which he hadn't noticed himself, but a woman comrade in your organization pointed out to him that a woman had made a proposal, had raised something in the organization, and then right after her, a man reiterated the same thing, said essentially the same thing, and at that point he said, "Oh, what a good idea, let's do it," you know, but hadn't really realized that he didn't even hear the women. He wasn't paying enough attention to his woman comrade, taking her seriously enough to recognize it the first time it came around. And that doesn't just happen here, that happens in every organization on the left and of course in the mainstream society all the time. But I really appreciate this comrade's willingness to share that story and his commitment to learn from it and to make sure that that doesn't happen in this organization, just as we try to make sure it doesn't happen in our organization by addressing problems and dealing with them as they come up. Because the organizations that tell you, oh, we've decided that we're for women's liberation, and so sexism isn't a problem for us anymore, are just deluding themselves. And they're trying to delude the very people that they're trying to win to their support. And women will not join an organization, will not become part of it, will not stay a part of it at least, if they know that that commitment to eradicating the oppression of women is just on the surface, is only getting lip service and is not real. Just as people of color aren't going to join a mixed organization if they don't sense that the commitment to address racism is real and it's genuine and it's something that every single person in the organization is taking responsibility for. Being here in Utah too, the whole issue made me think of an analogy. This, like the state of Washington where I grew up years ago at the beginning of the 20th century, was a place where the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, were organizing. And they're an example of an organization that really prided itself on not discriminating against black workers in particular. They called their organization colorblind. And they were very proud of that. But the problem was, it wasn't enough to be colorblind. It wasn't enough to say we treat all workers the same and we demand that all workers be the same. Because the reality in society is that the society is not colorblind. Black workers, for example, or Latino workers, or Chicano workers, or Native Americans in this country are treated differently by the society. They have a different reality to deal with by being oppressed on a social basis as well as being often doubly exploited on the job. And that creates a different reality and specific issues which have to be addressed. You can't say, oh, it's all going to get subsumed under liberating the working class. And in fact, I believe that our working class is so deeply divided along issues of sex and of gender and of sexuality and of age often and of abilities that that unless we put these right up at the front and say these are class issues, these are issues that we have to address, we're not going to be able to build a revolutionary movement. It's not a revolutionary movement I'd want to be part of, frankly. And that is really the reality that we have to deal with in this country. Another question that I've been asked by people here is, well, why socialist feminism? And let me just say as an aside before I address that, I understand that this group, I think most, if not all of you, consider yourself socialists. You're anti-capitalist warriors. And so I think you're all pretty on board with the idea of why socialist feminism as opposed to reformist feminism or radical feminism, or, so I'm not even going to bother to go into that part of it. But why socialist feminism and not also socialist anti-racism or queer liberationism? And I think that that's a valid question, because certainly fighting against racism as an institution and as a practice in this country, and against all manifestations of it, is critical to building a working class struggle. Attacking issues of how young workers and the elderly are differently treated is very important. Addressing the oppression of lesbians, gays, bis, transgender people, all that, what we now call queer liberationism, all of that is a very important issue for us to address and to tackle with. But why don't we, every time we say the word, try and incorporate all of that or other aspects as well? And I was thinking about that. I mean, that's a serious question. There is something that is unique about the role of women and the position that are women in society, and that is that the oppression of women actually preceded all those other forms of oppression. In fact, it was women as a sex who were the first group, the first class, in essence, to be defined and subjected to oppression. I and our organizations do very much base ourselves on the concepts that were developed by Engels in the origins of the family, private property, and the state. And I know many of you are familiar with that. So if you want to talk more about it later, we can. But that's the basic idea that we talked about. That very early society, when the value of the labor of every single member of the society was important to the survival of the group, people were all valued. And there was a division of labor based on women's reproductive capacity and our role in and around the home, which was very broadly defined and meant the entire village, the entire encampment of the group, was very much women's purview. And that had a value. The leadership of women was respected and was an integral part of the entire group. And it wasn't until property began to accumulate, until there was wealth that could be continued and saved up and stored up. And because it was initially in the form of herds of animals, which were traditionally come out of men's role in society, that private property, that wealth, began to accrue in men's hands. And from there, we developed the whole system of the patriarchy and the protecting of men's property, and women and children becoming part of the definition of that property. Patriarchy preceded class oppression, or oppression in capitalism, certainly. Let's talk about capitalism in particular. It preceded it, but has become entirely built into it, taken over by it, and made integral to the economic system that we live in. It is now part and parcel of it, and that is what I think is also important to emphasize when we're talking about socialist feminism or Marxist feminism, that socialism can understand and give us a way to understand and explain and decide how to attack the problems and the oppression of women, as it can with race and with other social issues that we deal with. And in order to be complete, it has to do that. You know, the guys, I will say predominantly guys, but not only men, who call themselves socialists and focus only on the relatively more privileged sectors of the workers, who, when you say worker, has this image in their mind of a white man with a hard hat. You know, that is just not the reality of the working class. Most of the places around the world, and certainly not here either. The majority of the working class in this country, women, people of color together, you add queers and you have a strong, sizable majority of the working class. White men are just a fraction of it. So our class politics have to address this and have to be informed by this. Traditionally, there have always been some sectors of the socialist movement and of the left in general that have really recognized and made major contributions to understanding the oppression of women. I've mentioned Engels. August Bebel in Germany wrote Women in Socialism, which was a huge contribution to the understanding of that dynamic. Lenin wrote about women and called for the Bolsheviks to really take seriously the need to build organizations for women and for working class women in particular. Clara Zetkin, Leon Trotsky, all of them wrote about this. Trotsky talked about how under the period of the decay of capitalism, which unfortunately we're still living in, is going through a very protracted and interminable, it sometimes seems, but I hope it won't be. I don't trust that it won't be. Period of decay. He talked about how that dealt its hardest blows to working class women. And therefore, it was important to turn to the woman worker and to the youth, because here would come the forces of rebellion that would really keep in the socialist movement and strengthen the revolutionary movement. Turn to the woman worker. In this country, too, there have been elements in among the socialist movement that have really kept this vision alive and added to it. You know, I was thinking about, too, the whole period of World War II. You know, when men were sent off to war, as happened in the past, women were pulled into the factories. Then they were it was okay to be part of the workforce. Men came back after World War II, and all of a sudden women were supposed to go back into the home and go back to being homemakers and mothers. And that is this part of the source of this huge period of the 50s where women were being inculcated with how to be the good little housewife, and you know, the whole June Cleaver type of ideal for what women were supposed to be, wearing their pearls in their dresses as they wash the dishes. You know, that was a huge effort to re-socialize, re-brainwash women into going back into the home when their labor wasn't needed in the social sphere, in the public sphere any longer. But during that same period of the 50s, there were women in what at that point was, I think, the only Trotskyist socialist party, the Socialist Workers' Party, there were women who were keeping those ideas alive, who were fighting even within their organization for the recognition of the importance of the experience of women, and were supporting their leadership, who were pushing to have women on the national committee and put up these candidates for positions in the electoral campaigns. And they really did keep those ideas alive. Then as the civil rights movement grew, and with it the anti-war movement and other forms of liberation struggle, the second wave of feminism really took off. And these women from the Trotskyist left were there to help raise some of the issues and bring out some of the writings that had been being done and guarded over the years, and to remind people about some of the things that great socialist leaders had also written in the past, and we're there also on the ground to help organize. And this was something that was really important, and it was very soon into this upsurge that was the second wave of feminism that socialist feminism began to be talked about. In fact, my organization, Radical Women, was founded a year after the Freedom Socialist Party, and the same year that the National Organization for Women was started. So right from the beginning, the women's movement began to divide into sectors of socialist feminists, people who saw that we needed to have a working class connection, that we needed to aim for a more fundamental change in society than just these surface tinkerings with reforms. And also recognize that radical feminism was not the answer. It wasn't that men were the enemy. In fact, men should be feminists. Working class men have gains to be made by wiping out the divisions in our class that are created by gender and the divisions that are created by race. We all have an interest in eradicating those from our class and from our movement. But as the women's movement grew, right away it became obvious that there were really severe problems within the organizations. The way that, for example, black women were treated within the civil rights movement. Their leadership repelled, they're being isolated, they're being, in some cases, like kind of burned out and pushed aside. The way women in the student movement and the New Left, the anti-war movement, were relegated to running Mimeo machines and making coffee. The way that women in the anti-war and the anti-draft movement were told, well, you can't be drafted, so you don't have anything to say. It's the men who should be making the policy. All of these things needed to be addressed. It really cast a very harsh and clarifying light on the fact that sexism was alive and all too well in most aspects in most parts of the left movements and in the liberation movements of the different ethnic and racial groups as well. And that really had to be addressed, and that's one of the things that women really took on, and that socialist feminism in particular took on. This became a pole for drawing people together, for saying, look, women are the super oppressed half of every group in the society that is oppressed, or they are exploited as workers. And this is where you're going to find people who are going to be able to draw these issues together. Who but a working class woman of color is going to best understand how race and sex dynamics are riven through the class struggle? How, in fact, these issues have to be combined in how we fight back if we're going to have a meaningful and successful revolutionary movement. And that's really what's happened. We've had to fight a lot as we've gone. And as I was talking about earlier, as far as, in a lot of ways, consciousness has grown, and as far as certainly we've made the point that when we address issues, we have to be multi-issue. We can't just focus on one tiny reform or demand without talking about how it affects other people, or how it may differently affect a woman of color than it does a white woman, for example. That we've raised this, we've talked about it, and yet it's still happening around us. We're still seeing examples of how it's not being adequately addressed. I wanted to give a couple of examples too, and you can probably add to this, of how then socialist feminism moves into action, how it is combined with the program that then can form as the basis for action. And if you're interested in this, I'd recommend two other things to you to look at in more detail. But we have, for example, the Radical Women Manifesto, which is a book over here. It's the fundamental book of the organization Radical Women, which is a separate group and an autonomous from the party. Thank you, Victor. It includes a theoretical section and then a section that's called program. And that is really based on the Trotskyist idea of a transitional program. And actually, Greg was showing me the RSU booklet that you guys have. And I see that that's one of the things that's talked about there in connection with Trotskyism. The whole idea of how do you make a link from the reforms that people need as part of their daily lives, you know, having a living wage, being able to get childcare. How do you link that to people developing a revolutionary consciousness and understanding that to really fully realize that, we're going to have to get rid of capitalism because it's never going to provide that for us, you know? So that's a good example of that. In a more succinct version, and I do have a stack over here of free copies, the Freedom Socialist Party sought to sort of condense ideas for how to address the current economic crisis. And we call it a 10-point program for dealing with the economic crisis and making the ruling class pay for their own damn crisis rather than taking it out of us. And so I ask people to help yourself to a copy of that. To talk about a few specific examples, I thought I'd just mention one that's kind of historical. It's one that made a big impression on me because it's when I was, something I became involved in when I was pretty new to socialist politics. I was a student at the University of Washington School of Medicine, and there were a lot of workers who were really being treated shabbily. And of course it was mostly women and people of color who were in the lower paid jobs, who were custodians and dishwashers and the dietary workers and that whole category. And they had tried to get their unions, which was an AFSCME union, to represent them and to fight against it. And they were just getting nowhere. So we formed an alliance, and it was called the United Workers Union Independent. It wasn't meant to replace or transplant itself or try and steal forces away from another union, but it was a way of trying to organize people. And it had support from a lot of us who were students as well. And one of the things they did was go through all the job classifications and show how work that was really very similar, but was traditionally done by a woman, for example, was paid perhaps at half the rate of a job that required very similar skills or experience, but was traditionally usually done by a man. And the same for jobs that tended to be racially segregated. And they showed how unjust this was. And actually, that was the first example of the struggle for what became known as comparable work. And the process of raising those and of bringing that focus on the special issues around sex and around race in the process of that struggle really revolutionized people's thinking and brought together a struggle that was actually then carried on a strike at the University of Washington. And ultimately, those concepts did finally get adopted into a lot of the public work sector within Washington State over the next few years, so it had a big impact. Another example from more recent history, again, of how to bring those, what I would call socialist feminist politics into reality. Another example I can think of is from work in the reproductive rights arena. And this is something we've done a lot of work on over the years. But recently, for example, this was a few years ago, there was a clinic that was in a lot of trouble in Jackson, Mississippi. It was one of the places that was targeted, as has one of our clinics in the Bronx, been targeted by the right wing to try and get it to shut down. But this was like the only clinic that provided abortion as part of its services in Jackson, Mississippi, and one of the few in that whole part of the state. So they put out a call for people to go down and help them out. And we Radical Women organized women from New York and from California and Portland, Oregon, to go and be part of working with the coalition there. And in the course of raising that, we also talked about issues of race and how you connect the demand for free access to abortion, with a lot of the concerns in how women of color are differentially treated by the system. And the fact that forced sterilization is often the thing that is the push that poor women are pushed to, and especially poor women of color, women who are on welfare, that kind of aid. We raised that issue. We talked about how important it is to be confronted with the right wing. You know, you don't just sit back and, you know, have your own little demonstration and your little part. You go right up in their faces and you out-organize them. You bring out more forces than they have, and you make it very clear that you will not tolerate, and that the working class will not tolerate attacks on itself, whether these attacks are made through abortion, whether they're made through white supremacy, whether they're made in anti-queer maneuvers by the right wing. We recognize that they all come from a very related source. And the other thing we did was, in the process of doing that, educate about why a for-profit system is never going to ultimately solve this problem for us, why the capitalist system keeps letting these yahoos find another way in, despite whatever reforms or laws that we may win to protect this right and protect the women. And we also raised the fact that the right to abortion doesn't mean a damn thing if you can't afford it. And that means that we have to have health care. We need universal free health care for all. And the things that women need, including abortion, need to be available on demand. So again, this is how you can use what I think what I define as socialist feminist politics to really build, strengthen, and broaden, and in often cases bring a more revolutionary consciousness to the level of struggle that you're engaged in. That's really, I think, one of the main things I want to talk about. I could kind of go on forever about different examples or why I think that these kind of things are important, or stories about how I ended up butting heads with people who kind of just don't see why it is that we have to be talking about the emancipation of women and still in this day and age. But I do really think it'd be interesting to have some, you know, more back and forth. So I hope people will raise questions or ideas or points of contention or anything else, and I really look forward to that. And also, I hope you'll take a few minutes before the meeting breaks up or as we break up, to take a look at some of the things that I've brought with me. As you can imagine, I'm not looking forward to carrying a lot of stuff back across the country, so I hope you'll find things that you find interesting and would like to take a copy of. And I also have brochures for things that are for these and for some other things that I didn't bring with me that are available online at our website, www.socialism.com. That can be ordered, or the website also has other things. We update it frequently with news about revolutionary struggles around the world. We have an education section that has copies of readings and study guides for some of the classics of Marxism, and I hope people will have a chance to check it out and that you'll find it useful. So thanks again for inviting me. Yeah, hi.
I was just wondering what your thoughts are about, or if you've done any organizing with women in the Global South, and just kind of...
I'm sorry, women?
Women in the Global South, so women in industrialized countries and women in non-industrialized countries, looking at where their interests are similar or sharing struggles with women in those situations, if you're familiar with any goals or campaigns like that.
Yeah, that's something that's actually very important to us. And let me just start by mentioning another book that I have here, One Hemisphere Indivisible, which was grew out of the political resolution from the Freedom Socialist Party's convention time before last. And we were looking at that for reasons I think similar to your concerns in raising it, that that internationalism and as a living reality is really very important to us. We consider that like a fundamental part of Trotskyism. But to make it meaningful, it means really working with and collaborating with and understanding one another on that kind of grassroots level and building together. So that is very important to us. And we've looked at ways of developing connections, particularly within this hemisphere, although we've done other things as well. We do also, by the way, have branches of Radical Women in the Freedom Socialist Party in Australia as well. But particularly we've had to focus on Latin America for the last several years because after all this is our continent, and we have developed relationships, some fairly close relationships with a group in Costa Rica. Radical Women sent a delegation to Women's Encuentro in Argentina last year, which was a yearly thing that was attended by thousands of women. And we really collaborated with an Argentinian group there to co-present workshops with them. And we have a close relationship with a group in Mexico as well. So we do seek to work that way whenever we can. And we recognize that our experiences are very different in the different countries. I mean, obviously, the working class here, although it's so tremendously stratified and there are people that are so intensely exploited, as a whole, we're privileged compared to the rest of the world. And understanding that and how that dynamic operates is really important. Understanding how neoliberalism has affected us and how it's affected working women, for example, and all workers in other countries is really important to understand how we can make common cause. I mean, that's part of making internationalism something real other than just giving lip service to. And so we try to really develop that on a level where we can work with people, not like too many solidarity activists. It's all about, we'll help you out, we'll help fundraise for you, we'll, and maybe never say anything critical ever about, what they think might be a better tactic to use, or never, we're very passive in the way they support. We believe in trying to develop relationships where we're really collaborating. The one other thing that reminds me of it too is, which I just have kind of a pet peeve about, is the solidarity movement or the immigrant rights movement. You've seen it in a lot of times where there's socialists who are active in the movement, but you never friggin' know it to see a demonstration happening. It's the socialists who go out there and organize the demonstration, and then they put up church leaders and Democratic Party politicians and mainstream pundits up on the stage, and they stand up there as representatives of some group that they're in and never say, I am a socialist and I believe that we have to get rid of capitalism and this is why. I don't have the sense that you guys are like that. I'm just saying we got too many of those types in New York City for sure. And I do think that if we're not ready to be open socialists and to be talking about getting rid of capitalism now, it's going to be too late by the time people do get ready.
What has organized in the attack on women right now, where they're trying to outlaw or make it harder for women to have abortions in what is it, 15 states now, where they have the governors that are Republican governors at the time. Is there some movement that has been organized to help them out or to be a part of that or to resist that?
Yeah, there are efforts to do that. And certainly I think that it's very clear that the right wing is very much still, and they're going after women in a big way. One of the problems, though, is that some of the mainstream reformist groups like NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League, and the NOW section of NOW that works on reproductive rights, they really are stuck in this reformist-minded track. They keep trying to tinker with the laws and stay within the bounds of respectability and not making broader connections to class issues. And that really hamstrings their ability of how far they're going to go. So, but there are active out there. And in New York, as an example, we were working with a group that started out around abortion clinic defense, this one clinic in the Bronx. But we've tried to expand that beyond to talk about these very issues, like the ones I've been raising here, and broadening the attack, like the response to the recent attempts by in Congress to tie down or to pick away at reproductive freedoms, bit by bit. And so I think that that's really important work, but we have to keep hammering away at making it meaningful and making it not just, again, another little bit of reform. Another example that just happened, I saw in the email, is one of the things we worked on in New York was trying to go after these things that are fake clinics. They call themselves clinics, but in fact they are anti-abortion. They don't have doctors there. They don't provide any referrals for abortion services. And NARAL actually was the organization that spearheaded this, but we also organized people to go to the city council hearings and to protest it. And the city council passed legislation that would require them to post, we don't give abortion referrals, we don't have a doctor here. And can you believe it? There's a judge that just put a stay order to keep it from being implemented. So now it's like another example of reforms you have to keep fighting for over and over again. So another lesson in why going for fundamental change, it's like, what's the line? Let's be realistic, let's do the impossible. Rather than play like Sisyphus and keep rolling the same boulder up the hill, let's just have a revolution and,
Exactly. I'm down for that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So like what you were just talking about, so then like outside the clinic, because that happened here, there's a place, I don't know what it's called, that they set up right next to Planned Parenthood. And so then like, do they have to post the signs outside or just then let the women or people know, or?
Well, what we did at ours is we developed a relationship with the woman who coordinates the clinic, and she's actually become very supportive and somewhat radicalized in the process, but she really, some abortion clinic or abortion providers have wanted to keep their heads down and they're worried about pissing people off. She's been one of the people that's willing to stand up, which is really good. And so what happens is that we set up a little, like a police guardrails, and we tell them, there's a law, you can't come closer than it's supposed to be 10 feet from the door. And we confront them if they do try and come in. When we see women coming from the corner, we go out and walk next to them and explain to them what's going on so that the right-wingers can't start haranguing them and telling them how awful they are. We sometimes, if the ladies come to the back door and have the Catholic Church organizes people, and something that's really disgusting, the Catholic Church is actually paying people to go there. Yeah, because they got the money to do it, so so if they start praying, we start chanting and we're talking to people and talking about other issues. So there's a lot of tactics that we use. But we also have tried, and Radical Women's role in particular in this, is have tried to do outreach to local women in the area and have like some literature that will explain why we're there, what the issues are, and why we think it's important not to let the right wing get away with harassing people and making it hard to keep the clinic operating.
And what was the name of that group?
NARAL, that's actually a separate issue. That's the National Abortion Rights Action League. That's a national group. The coalition of people that we're working with on the clinic defense and then on bringing out the reproductive rights issue is the New York Committee for Abortion and Clinic Defense. And we've worked with, we've sought to make alliances in that with other organizations as well. And for the anniversary of Roe v. Wade last year, we actually got together a coalition of people from NOW and from the National Lawyers Guild and other groups to come with us to have a rally there. So it's good. We keep plugging away at it.
Seems like we should have a rally for all, for women's right to have an abortion, the right to choose, and just makes me mad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, that gives you an opportunity to bring in these other issues about it. One thing that people may have heard of the Hyde Amendment. That actually was passed a long time ago, sometime in the 70s. But it's been continued to be enforced. What it meant was that the states no longer were required to provide Medicaid funding for abortions. So some states do, like New York, but many don't. And the first year that the Hyde Amendment went into effect, the number of sterilizations in Chicago went like that. And in fact, the increased number of sterilizations was exactly equal, about 6,000 in Chicago, to the drop in the number of abortions that were performed. So it's like when women don't have that as available as an option, and they can't afford to get it on their own, what are they going to do, you know? So this is the kind of double bind that still exists for poor women, for women who are on welfare, and they're still getting pressured by the people that control the money. And that's becoming, of course, it's being cut back down for everybody. So I think it's a real natural for leading into talking about the problems with sex and race discrimination in the healthcare system, in the society in general. For that matter, how about women who want to decide to have a child? But you know, you really kind of do need to have a job where you have a living wage if you're going to be able to do that. You need to have access to health, to childcare, which should be funded by the state and by businesses, you know. And these are basic social issues, working class issues that go, you know, right like this with reproductive concerns for women. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I've sort of become aware recently of how the adoption industry is really an exploitative business, and that the recent marketing scheme is open adoption, which is not legally enforceable. So a lot of women who never would have considered putting their babies up for adoption feel like that's a situation they can live with because if they don't have the resources, they're scared to keep that child because they're in a crisis. They think, okay, well at least I can see my child. But legally they really can't. I have a friend who's fighting this all the way to the California Supreme Court. I hope she wins her case. But I'm really becoming aware that these agencies, instead of saying this baby needs clothes and food, they're saying it needs new parents. It needs bourgeois parents. You know, it needs.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's a way of saying that if you don't have money, you're by definition incompetent as a parent, and I think it's really pernicious, and we accept it a lot. It's one of those ideas that we just sort of take for granted in society, but I think it really needs some critical pressure put on it to see how poor women are manipulated, and to say nothing of international adoptions, which is an even more obscene process where children are kidnapped and sold into adoption. Is really a form of slavery in a way, human trafficking. Or I heard of a really outrageous case where teenage girls were kidnapped and raped and forced to bear children that were then sold into. I mean, that's probably the most hideous example I've ever heard of. But there are these.
Yeah, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a group that talks about that? Because I really take that to heart when I hear about that stuff. And I don't know if you guys have seen a movie, it's called Taken, where some guy takes his daughter to France, and he's like a trained killer by the CIA, and he just takes out all these bastards. And it's just, it's beautiful. I mean, I don't want to go out and kill people, but maybe get a hold of some people like you and other people that think about that. I think that's pretty, it's a tragedy. So, I don't know, maybe I can talk to you later before.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Well, I just had never heard that come up in feminist circles that I've been a part of before, and a lot of the women that this happens to don't necessarily identify as feminists or have political consciousness, and I just think it's something that I'd like to see more people who have a critical background maybe think through and politicize some more than those.
I think you raised a really good point. And the question too about organizations that work on it, Gabriella Network is one of them that works a lot on human trafficking in general, though I don't know how much they focus on children.
Wait, what are they called?
Gabriella Network. They're Philippine and US based. And that's, of course, an issue that's affected a lot of women from their country that they connected pretty broadly also.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the problems around marbling in the feminist message or racist message into other problems that you are addressing. I know that through the practice of trying to build up mass movements for, say, protests on, say, immigration rights, that sometimes if you try to marble stuff in like that, you turn off some of the constituency that would be willing to step forward and fight for that particular issue. Can you maybe just discuss more about the ways that you can address that, or the pros and cons? You know what I mean? It's just a general question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a pretty common challenge in the movement too. The basic concept that our organization usually tries to apply is that of the United Front, which is that we build a group that agrees around a particular issue, say immigrant rights, and define that fairly broadly. If you support this issue, you're welcome to be part of this coalition. But we don't let it be subsumed under bourgeois organizations, under their program or their concerns, or let them dominate. You know, if they want to join us, that's fine, but we don't let them take over and make it into, you know, just a very loosey-goosey coalition, the so-called People's Front, which ends up being bourgeois run. But within that, we fight for democracy and the right of different organizations then to raise and to add and to express their own issues. You know, it's like the concept of march together and have your own placards, your own piece of literature that explains how you see that issue, how you understand that issue. Let all those groups have a voice at the mic when you're talking about it, you know. And so we would say anyone who supports the rights of immigrants to be in this country and to work is fine. And when we go, we're going to talk about the fact that we in fact think there should be open borders, that we think in fact that health care needs to be made available to immigrants regardless of their legal standing and on a free basis, just as it should be for all residents in this country. That we may raise the specific issues of women, the way that families have been divided by the unfairness of the laws that exist now. So that's how we try and do it in general. You don't necessarily have to have everybody sign on the dotted line of your entire program to say you're going to be willing to work with them. In fact, you do that and you're not going to be effective in drawing people in. But you have to insist on the right to raise those ideas. If you're working with a coalition that tells you to shut up and don't bring your own signs and you can't pass your newspaper out at our demonstration, what's the point, you know?
So would you say then that when you have a sort of unified front action, you kind of allow people to bring some of their own stuff? Like you organize around a core issue, but you allow people and other speakers perhaps to touch on other things, like for instance feminist or racial issues and things inside of that? Or
Absolutely, yeah. And you talk about another example, say in the anti-war movement. You know, okay, anti-war movement, we're going to have a demonstration. If you are against the war, now the occupation of Iraq, you're welcome to come and be part of it. And we, as feminists, might decide, okay, this is a time where we really have to talk about the problem of how women are raped and abused under an occupying army, and how women in the army are raped and abused and discriminated against. We might talk about the fact that although there's no longer a draft, there's an economic draft, and it's you know, youth of color, for the most part, who can't get any other kind of work, who are going to be drawn into the army and end up being used as fodder and used as oppressors of other peoples. You know, and we may talk, and we certainly will talk about the fact that capitalism needs war and how it uses it, and how, and the fact that 1 hour of what the first Iraq War cost, 1 hour of the first Iraq War, could have paid for the public education for an entire year in this country. So, you know, all you need to do is cut the military budget, and you can take care of health care, housing, and education right off the bat for people.
for like 30 minutes of the Afghanistan war could found like Planned Parenthood for a whole year.
Mhm.
You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. So that's an example too of what I think you're talking about. You know, it's like anti-war is one very simple, straightforward issue, and a lot of people may say they agree from very different perspectives, as pacifists, as you know, from whatever perspective. But we as revolutionaries should go there with these other messages and talk about how they're connected.
How can you put the people that are responsible in the spotlight now? 'Cause I mean, there's so much technology. There's cameras at every street now. You know, I mean that's a little off the subject, but kind of. But how can you put these people in the light and show them, you know, how criminal they are?
Yeah.
Just how base and wretched they are.
Well, that's part of the challenge, isn't it? Especially when they have all the money and they're the ones that own the TV stations.
Right.
We need a TV
You
station.
keep raising ideas, you keep educating people, you use the internet, you talk about it, you talk to your coworkers about the ideas, and then someday we'll have enough oomph to go ahead and take over the TV stations.
Yeah, like I love
Along
to
with
see
everything
these.
else.
I'm not being racial or anything, but the majority of them I see is the Mexican ladies and a couple guys here and there, and they hold these big banners saying "shame on," you know, so and so. It's just, you know, it's like let's embarrass them until they do what we want.
Well, they were out there this morning saying, you know, Grand America, shame on you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, I just
Oh,
don't
that-
say that. I think it's funny.
The thing with Rupert Murdoch now
Oh, yeah.
also being brought up, that needs to stay in, you know, the mainstream media, and everything needs to be coming up about that.
Mhm.
And I guess they're going on an investigation. Here, there was FBI investigation, but, you know, make sure that we don't get, that it's not suppressed. And it'd be nice to bring down Fox News. I'd love it.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that one. Anybody else?
Well, I think a good example too is that DSK, the rape in New York, you know,
Yeah.
and how it's twisted now and turned. It's
Mhm.
putting the spotlight on, you know, first of all, it's shown up as, you know, this charge, and now she becomes, you know, just this lech of a person, a woman of color, of course, and now she becomes the target of it. And it's so strange how they all seem to turn out that way, especially in celebrity circles like that, somehow. And it seems really strange. See, at first he's caught in a red-handed or whatever, and then turns around, their evidence is just, now their evidence is basically against a female. And it was her fault that this all happened, or she set him up, or whatever happened with it. But you never seem to, it's sensationalism first, and then you get to the facts or whatever, so you can find it out. And it seems so bought and paid for all the time. It's really
Right, the first time she was a really credible witness, and it's, you know, this is really a horrible thing. Now all of a sudden, charges are gonna be dropped.
Yeah.
That, because she was a prostitute at some time or something. Uh-oh.
I got a question from your perspective, for a feminist perspective, because I was reading a lot about like how in countries like Mexico and Colombia, prostitutes are getting unionized, you know, and they're considered right now sexual workers, you know. So what is your perspective on your approach as a feminist?
Well, yeah, we do think that prostitution should not be illegal, because when it is, who do they take it out on? You know, it's the women that are already being exploited sexually, who then are arrested and subjected to the system. At the same time, we point out the fact that prostitution only exists because of sexism in society, and that women don't turn to that because anybody really wants to do that as a way to live. They turn to it because they haven't got a job. They can't get a job because the way the market is. They haven't got the education, or they haven't got other options available to them. So again, is to try and make a transition. We say, yes, it should be legalized, but at the same time, we want to not have to be the only option available to women. So we call for, yes, protections for health care, for providing training, for opening the doors to be able to do something different. And at the same time, for educating men about, what schmucks they are, what about why you shouldn't oppress and exploit women in that manner. So, so that's the approach we take to it. I can mention too, I mentioned the draft earlier, and I should tell you too, historically our position on that has been that we're opposed to a draft for imperialist wars. At the same time, if there is going to be a draft, we insist that women should be treated equally, and that women who are in the military should be treated equally. They should have the same pay, the same rights that anybody else does. And at the same time, they were trying to get everybody else out of the army and cut the military budget, at least when we're talking about an imperialist country's army. We're saying, but you can't discriminate against any group of people, women included, in the process of doing that. So that's what our position on that is. Well, I'm going to be around town for another day or so. I'm not leaving till Monday morning. So again, I've really enjoyed the time that I've had and meeting many of you before, and people here today for the first time too. I think that's really great, and I hope I have a chance to talk with you a little bit more before I have to take off. I do have one other little thing I can pass around, which is subscription forms. If you are interested in the Freedom Socialist newspaper, it comes out every 2 months, and I'll pass these around. It's just $10 a year. It can be either print or email version, and $5 for students or people on strikers. In fact, I'd be happy to, if anybody's on strike here, I'd be happy to subsidize myself. I came very close to worrying about whether I was going to have problems making it, because my union came close to going on strike as of July 1st, but had a last-minute settlement. So, in any case, thanks again for having me here.